Ms. Keith Hayes, I thank you all for coming and inviting me to come speak today. I want to preface my talk by saying that this is a topic, talking about web accessibility, that cannot possibly be covered fully in 40 minutes. However, you should be able to leave today with an understanding of what is needed and just have a bit of an insight into what it's like to look for accessibility in a website, design for accessibility, and to support those who have varying abilities. So yes, thank you for any questions you put into the chat, and let's launch into it, shall we? So here's an overview of just what I'm going to talk about today. We'll talk about an accessibility overview, just what it is a little bit, keys to web accessibility, how the web works under the hood to talk to assistive technologies like screen readers, and then various elements that are needed for an accessible website: semantic structure, keyboard support, visual focus indicators, logical reading order, navigation, presentation alternatives, otherwise known, commonly referred to as alt text, color contrast. For the last several, I'm not going to go through my slides, even though the information will be in there, and I will give the slide deck out for distribution. What I'm going to do instead is just show a few websites and take a look at things. Is everybody, you know what? Thank you for stating that.
Uh-oh.
Is that better?
Thank you.
You would think I don't present on a daily basis or something. Sorry about that. That's so here's what we'll cover today. As I said, after my overview from the slides, we'll switch to a live websites, and what I'd like are some volunteers of websites to take a look at, so that I don't make anyone feel picked on.
Beth, when you get a moment, you come back to the back to see this. I will.
Let's start with an overview. Disability is best considered an aspect of diversity. We tend to think of it in a medical model, in a deficit model, where someone who is blind, someone is, is a wheelchair user, that sort of thing. But what we really need to do is think about disability in terms of the unique experiences that people have. We all experience the world in unique ways. Disability is also not a single phenomenon. It's informed by personal and social cultural factors. What might be considered a disability or an impairment in one setting would not necessarily be a disability or impairment in another. Disabilities may be permanent or temporary. They may not be visible to others. We call those non-visible disabilities. They should be considered then in terms of barriers due to context. So it's not an individual who is disabled. It's a person, an individual who happens to have a disability and a unique way of interacting with the world because of that, as we all have unique ways, preferences, and needs. To the right of this slide, there's a bullet point of common functional disability types. So visual disabilities, blindness and low vision, auditory, deafness, hard of hearing, motor, paralysis, cerebral palsy, missing and damaged limbs. Cognitive is a large umbrella term. We're talking about learning disabilities, dyslexia, traumatic brain injury, anything that affects the ability to perceive information, to process that information and act on that information. Seizures. We also have age-related impairments that can act as disabilities: decreased sensory acuity, decreased dexterity, decreased stamina. And psychiatric disorders also qualify as functional disabilities: anxiety disorders, bipolar disorders, PTSD, major depressive. In fact, that is one of the largest categories of for students at higher ed that self-report having a disability. A major psychiatric diagnosis is their reported disability. So as we move forward, I'd like you to think about the 3 E's of accessibility. In order to be considered accessible, electronic documents and websites count in that same category, must have the following 3 characteristics. They must be equally integrated, providing a similarly inclusive experience and access. That access must be equally effective. It must provide equal opportunity or outcome. If it does not, then you cannot consider that website or electronic document or experience accessible. It needs to offer a substantially equivalent ease of use. That's providing access that is not substantially more difficult for users with a disability. Case in point, we had a calendar app at the university, and people were sending out event notices to students, and the event notices themselves were not accessible. They couldn't get any of the information about when the event was, what the event was about, how to attend the event. They had to click and find the link in the document, the email that was sent out, go to the university calendar and get the information there. They were able to get the information, but it was more difficult for those users because they had to first waste time on an inaccessible email, then waste time trying to find a link to information that would give them the info that other users got, just other students and employees got just by opening that email. Then they had to go make sense of the calendaring app and navigate that and then get the information they needed. So that did not offer an equally effective equivalent ease of use. So think about these, and questions come to mind as far as what it is you need to do for accessibility. There are legal technical requirements that governmental accommodations have and public accommodations. If you're a public accommodation, non-governmental, that would be the ADA Title III. I didn't put that on this slide, but as many libraries would be considered municipal in many areas, then we have federal and state laws that apply. This is Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 as amended, and the Illinois IT Accessibility Act. Prior to 2018, these two laws were very different. The Illinois requirements far exceeded the federal requirements, and it created issues working with vendors. Now they have been harmonized, there's full agreement, and so if you meet one of these, then you meet the other. Both of these laws mandate something known as the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0 or WCAG. And there are conformance requirements in there, level A, level AA. And each of these basically explain how to make an accessible web experience. This has been applied to non-web content, so electronic documents, software, etc., by these federal and state laws. So it's not just about the web. And then they require support for all common operating environments and what are known as user agents. A user agent is a web browser. It is an assistive technology. So we're talking about Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Edge. We're talking about assistive technologies like screen readers, text-to-speech software, and speech control software. So JAWS, NVDA, VoiceOver for screen readers, Kurzweil, Read-Write Gold, Zoom Text for text-to-speech, and then speech control would be like Dragon, naturally speaking. Those are some of the most common. And then we're looking at Windows, macOS, iOS, and Android. The most important takeaway from this is that we cannot require a particular browser or a particular assistive technology, a particular screen reader, etc., to interact with information. We must support them all. And then on top of these legal requirements, and perhaps more important, are functional modes of interaction. These are stated within the laws, but it's also the actual way people interact. So the website and its downloadable content must be usable for individuals with these following modalities. There are 6 listed here. So without vision or with limited vision, where there's a visual mode of operation. So that applies to websites. Without perception of color, where the visual mode of operation also. Without hearing or with limited hearing, this would apply to any video content we put on the websites or any auditory feedback that we give. Without speech, where speech is used for input or control or operation. That doesn't really apply to websites, but it is an important modality. With limited manipulation, reach, and strength, where a manual mode of operation provided. So these would be individuals who perhaps are don't have full control of their arms or their fingers. They perhaps cannot operate a mouse, cannot do so with a lot of repetition, that sort of thing. And then finally, with limited language and cognitive and learning abilities. And so that would be where we're making the operation of the technology, or ICT, that stands for Information and Communications Technology. And that's anything that's technology used to access digital information, as well as any that accompanying digital information. And so we want to make the operation of that ICT easier for individuals with limited cognitive, language, and learning abilities. So you can think how, as we do this, consider these multiple modes of interaction, not only are we providing access, but we're actually making it easier for everyone. Subtitles are great for those whose English is not a first language, for English mode presentations. Better hierarchy and operation is good for those who have difficulty remembering or are unfamiliar with the technology. Say they're coming to a library, they don't use technology very frequently. They don't use the web very frequently necessarily. This would make it easier for them. So really considering all of these helps everyone. So let's talk about some keys to web accessibility. So remember, web accessibility is not just about those who are blind. For many, many years, one of the mantras of accessibility professionals was make your website accessible for those who are blind. The National Federation of the Blind was one of the most organized groups for advocacy. And they were also the group that was most strongly impacted by inaccessible web technologies. And so the web was largely static. And so if you didn't structure information properly, then it primarily left out those who were blind. And so we talked about making websites accessible to those who are blind. That's no longer the case. Yes, there's still a large impact for those who are blind, but we have to consider all of these functional modalities because we have a highly interactive web. We now have animations, we have video, we have richly interactive elements in our websites. And so we need to think about all the different modalities that the individuals may come to your website to use. One thing to think about is create user stories for yourself. There's a link here for stories of web users. That's a W3C, which are the W3 is the group that creates the standards for the web. They've created some examples. One of those here would be Ilya, who's a senior staff member who is blind. How would Ilya log into the website to update the catalog or update web content? How would Ilya simply use the electronic catalog to find books? That sort of thing. So consider also the WCAG-POUR principles. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are divided into 4 principles. Perceivable, which is the idea the information and the user interface must be perceivable to all modalities. Operable, the user interface and navigation must be operable by different modalities. If you can't use a mouse, can you do it with a keyboard? If you can't do it with either of those, can you do it with voice input? Is it understandable? Is the information in the user interface understandable when presented in different ways? If I couldn't see it, could I understand it? If I had to view it on a mobile device instead of a desktop, would it still make sense? Is what I'm being asked to do, the user task, understandable? And then robust. Is the content and operation reliable across multiple browsers, operating systems, assistive technologies, etc.? So consider all of these 4 principles from the perspective of each of the functional modalities. If I could not see it, is the information perceivable to me? If I could not use a mouse, is it operable? Is it understandable? Is it robust? If I were deaf or hard of hearing, answer all of those, etc. So here are 6 or 7 things that matter for making a web page accessible. A logical semantic structure, visual and programmatic, and I'll explain what that is in a minute or two. Keyboard support, you need to be able to use a keyboard. A perceivable focus indicator, a logical reading order navigation, sufficient color contrast, presentation alternatives for graphical content or captions for videos, and then standard coding, using the standards that are out there so that it increases robustness and interoperability. So let's dive into what happens under the hood when you're serving up a web page and someone who's using assistive technology like a screen reader, what it looks like to them and how they interact. So here is just kind of an overview diagram. We have at the left our HTML source code read by the browser. It's a simple web page, just having a title, it has a document heading, it has a paragraph of text and a link. We have in the middle what the browser does. The browser goes out, it grabs that web code, brings it in, and it creates a tree structure called the DOM. It stands for the Document Object Model. That tree structure is a structure of all the bit of code that was in that document and in that web page. And then it renders the page for the end user, but also in the background, it builds this accessibility tree. And that accessibility tree is what then goes to assistive technologies like screen readers. So screen readers do not interact directly with the web page that's rendered. So what you see is not the same thing as what is being given to assistive technologies. And then the user then interacts with those assistive technologies, which then interacts with the browser. So we've got a few things going on. So here's our page, the page source. We've got our document, just says my document heading. This is a paragraph. This is a link. So it's not the most inspiring web page out there, but it'll serve to illustrate what's going on here. To the right is the source code. You've got, if you don't speak HTML, this might seem a little different, but basically everything in HTML has a tag. In that tag are various bits of content. So my HTML document is the title for the page. There's a heading 1 or H1. That's my document heading. There's a div, which is just a block of content. It's used for styling purposes, and it just generally organize behind the scenes the data. In there, there's a paragraph. That's a P tag, and it says some paragraph text. Below all that, there's a link. There's an A tag. That href is where it goes. That's the URL. And then we have some link text, and we have a class that is making that text green. So that's kind of what a web page looks like. Very, very simple. This is what the document object model is of what the browser creates. So you can see how it took those elements and it broke them up. We've got the HTML element. We have a head. Inside that head is the title element. Inside the title, there's some text, my HTML document. We have a body element. Inside there is an H1, and inside there is my heading, my document heading. So that's that heading. We've got a div, a paragraph, some paragraph text. We have the link, the A element. We have a text node, some link text. We have an href, that's the URL or where it's going to take us. We have a class, that's our styling, green text, it made it green. So that's what that is used internally to represent that to the browser, and the browser uses that to render the web page. So the DOM is updated to reflect user interaction. If I hover over the link, the browser does something with the appearance. If I click on page content and we dynamically load, say we have a list of materials to load, the DOM is updated. So let's look at the accessibility tree that's created. This accessibility tree looks like this. Here's what the DOM looks like. And what happens is the browser, for performance reasons, tries to prune as much as it can out of this. And so to the right here, we see the accessibility tree. And so what we have is we took that title element, we took that heading, we took that paragraph, we took that link, and to the right, we simplified it. We now have just a title with a name, my HTML document. We have just a heading with a name, my document heading. It has a role of heading. That's the semantic role, which we'll get to. That's a heading level 1. That can matter as if your headings are nested. We have a container. The container has no name. It's a paragraph. Doesn't do anything other than tell a screen reader how to read the text. If you have text in your page, a whole lot of text, split up visually, but you don't have those paragraphs there, a screen reader is just going to try to read it all together. So here's our text node, some paragraph of text. We have a link, some link text, that's its name. It's focusable, meaning that you can interact with it. Screen reader needs to know that, because if it's not focusable, it won't let you interact. And we have some link text. So that's what's happened. And so we're throwing away a whole bunch of information. So imagine then, if you didn't follow standard coding practices, if you didn't use the semantic title, heading, container, these roles here, how much would not get passed to the end user? You notice the div, that went nowhere. It was thrown away. It was never given to the assistive technology. And that matters for some coding libraries where they might create everything in divs. And it looks great on the page, But as far as a screen reader user has, there's no structure to it whatsoever. So semantic structure, and this is the last bit I'll talk about before switching over. I talked a little bit about it in reference to the DOM, but that semantic structure is the way the information appears to someone and the meaning. If headings look like headings visually, we know to treat it as introducing something that follows it. If we have something that looks like a list, we know to treat that list and in a certain way. That information is grouped together logically. If we have a table structure, we know that data is tabular. There's a row column relationship to it somehow. So that's that visual structure. And in this web page, we've got a page title, Midwest Career Center to this fictional Midwest University. We have some menus. We have some main content. We have a nice image that is inviting, saying, hey, come talk to us. We've got these student success stories, etc. So that's our visual semantics. We need to make sure that's backed up programmatically. And the reason why is we've got nice layout here. I can kind of tell how the page is structured. I've got a menu across the top. I have a logo, a page title. I've got a menu to the left, office hours. I can kind of feel where the chunks of code are, the blocks of content are in this web page. Got a footer at the bottom. But to a screen reader user, they only see one element of the page at a time. Styling doesn't matter. They can't perceive the content of images. It's read, the content is read top to bottom, left to right, and it's only anything that is in the background programmatically. So text, if you have image text, that's not given to them. The visual information structure is not perceivable. So CSS style and positioning is not communicated to screen readers. And so what happens then is that if you use CSS to change the order of content in your page, then what you're doing visually doesn't match what is being given to assistive technologies. Also, dynamic changes are invisible unless you do something special to it, and that's using something called ARIA, stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. That's a W3C standard, and it's entirely designed to make richly interactive content and dynamic content accessible to users who are blind. And so otherwise dynamic changes are invisible. If I click on a menu and open a menu, if I don't have something telling assistive technologies, hey, this menu was collapsed, can be expanded, and I clicked it and expanded it, then a person who's blind won't know that. If I have a filter for a bunch of search results and I didn't use these extra ARIA coding, then the number of matches in my search and the results, and that there was a change to those, that'll be invisible. So if there are custom widgets where you're not using standard links, buttons, forms, etc., but you're creating other things, if those aren't coded correctly, then person who is blind will not be able to interact with them because the screen reader will get in the way. So this is why we need programmatic semantic structure, where it comes from a role page that's given to the DOM, as we saw, those role page elements. It specifies how information is related. Headings indicate that we have an outline structure. It's introducing something. It's telling us the purpose of that section of the page. Labels for form elements. It's telling us what the form control was for. Imagine trying to fill out a form, say to log in, and all you heard was edit blank, when instead what you should have heard was username, password. That's that programmatic semantic structure. So this is essential for users who are blind to make sense of the content. It's also used for screen reader navigation. So it's not just making sense of it, but I can navigate by headings quickly. I can navigate by other page structures quickly with a screen reader. It's also needed by voice control and other assistive technologies. Let's go back to that login form. If I'm saying, hey, move focus to the username field. Well, if that label wasn't there programmatically in the background associated with the username field, it's just visible, the voice control isn't going to know what to do with it. So that's semantic structure, and that's really one of the important concepts here. You want to make sure that headings are actually headings in the code, lists are lists, etc. So I'm going to switch from the slides now, and let's go to instead to a web page. So actually, let me do 2 more slides. Page regions, we'll get to that. In a web page, we have headings and we have regions. These are called landmarks. So it's important that the large sections of the page are divided into regions. Within those regions, we use headings to create the outline. So we have roles here: banner, complementary, content info, main, etc. Don't worry about remembering that. There's just 8 of them. Here's our web page from earlier. And here's what the landmark regions would look like. We've got a navigation, we have search, we have a banner. Banner is usually the header of the site. That's where my branding information is. We have navigation, we have office hours, complimentary regions, we have success stories. Complimentary is something a person may want to skip. It's not the main content of the page. Then we have the main content. And then content info, which is the site footer. Why site footer became content info, I don't know, but that's the standard and that's what it's for. It's usually where we would put copyright information, contact information, etc. And so I, as a screen reader user, could jump to any one of these sections and know very quickly where I was going in the page. I could just get an overview knowing, okay, we have a navigation, we have a search, I've got my heading. Oh, there's another menu here other than the main navigation. And it's labeled, so I know the difference between the site navigation and the section navigation. I have the office hours. I might skip that for now. I've got my welcome to my main content. Cool. I've got quick links. Those could be useful later. And then I've got the content info and others. So it allows me to very quickly make sense of the broad structure of the page. And so here's something for those who are using HTML to develop. Here is where we have HTML5, semantic regions. For everybody else, don't worry about that. Just know they exist and know it's a way for basic HTML to do what also ARIA can do. So you can take an older website that doesn't have the semantic regions, add ARIA roles to create those quite easily. And there's the ARIA authoring practices guide to guide you with that. There's links to that later in the document. Also about how regions should be used. There's only once banner, main content info, search, and I'll show you what that looks like in a web page. Others can be used multiple times. If you misuse the main or the banner or the search and use them multiple times, it creates confusion. And so a screen reader user is going to have difficulties making sense of the information. For the ones that can be used multiple times, you have to label them. You want to tell them so that people know the difference between navigation regions. Yeah, no. Headings. Headings are one of the primary ways we convey the document structure to users. And this is why I wanted to do this other slide. Sorry for misspeaking earlier. Heading 1 is reserved for the page title. And so the website title and the title of each page, each one must be unique. We want it to match the title a little bit. This is so a person knows they've come to the right place. If you don't have that, they have to spend time poking around the page to make sure they actually navigated to where they intended to go. So it's not actually part of the document outline. It's a navigational thing and a tool for identifying they're in the right place. Next, we have heading levels, H2 to H6. You've seen these in Word documents as well. Heading 1, heading 2, heading, etc. Start each region with a heading 2, and then go downward from there. If I'm into the right, you can see kind of a document outline. We have 2 sections that are first section, second section. In that section, we have a heading 3. There's subheadings, a heading 4 under that heading 3. The text of each is unique. That's within a given section. So don't skip levels. The reason why is if I'm going along and I have an H2 and suddenly I go to an H4, if I am a user who's blind, I'm going to be wasting time finding out where that H3 went. And I might go back and try to find it. Or it'll tell me, hey, this document outline is not really to be trusted. I'm going to have to spend a lot more time figuring out what the content of this page is about. It's okay to change the appearance of headings with CSS. There may be situations where you have H2s, especially where you want it to appear differently. It's common to try to use a different heading level to make that difference in appearance. Don't do that. Again, we're breaking up and confusing the document outline and information structure if we do. Instead, we use CSS to make that different heading, the headings appear different where we need it. Also, be concise. A heading is not a sentence or a paragraph. Less is more. You want to introduce the content. And if you're wanting to bold content or emphasize it in some way, a heading is not the tool for that. That's a misuse of headings. Headings are designed to create document outline, introduce content. So don't use them for emphasis, and don't make them very long. Other semantic structure, we have lists, bulleted and numbered, lists group information. It's really cool for screen reader users because they also will tell you how many items are in the list. Tables are for tabular data. They have a row and column headings. Make sure you have those. Avoid cell spans and column spans. There are ways to make a table accessible if you have those row spans and column spans, but it's a lot more difficult. If you can, just restructure things, split the tables up. Table caption identifies what each table is. Do not use tables for layout. It was an older practice before CSS was as robust as it is now. We'd use tables to lay out our page. The problem is that when you have a table for layout, assistive technologies change their interaction mode when they get to a table because it's expecting tabular data. And so you get to that table and now a person can't interact with the information in a way that makes a lot of sense. Iframes are really common. You have to label those. Again, that's for those of us who aren't developing a website, we don't necessarily need to do that other than to tell the person we're working with, hey, you've got that iframe where you're including this content from somewhere else. Make sure you label it. If we have the social media section, we need to make sure that that's labeled as our social media feed. If we have a video with an iframe, we may identify that it's that video because an iframe contents on an entirely different website. We don't know necessarily how accessible that content is. And a user might get trapped within that other content or become very confused because suddenly there's an entirely different document structure. And so they may want to skip it. And so label it for them. So now we're done with slides. I swear this time. And so we're going to go show you from the live websites a little bit about keyboard support and how to check for it, visual focus indicators, reading order, presentation alternatives, and color contrast. Are there any questions so far? Okay, I'm going to choose. Someone said, if you need a website to audit, please use ours, Niles Library. Fantastic. Thank you for volunteering that. So my goal with this is not to showcase or point out anybody did something really wrong. That's not my intent. It's to just take a look at what's happening and look at what we might have as some unintended consequences of how we created our websites. You don't know what you don't know, and there's always more to learn. So let's take a look at this. So it looks like we've got a banner here, Niles Main District Library. There's a navigation up there. There's this nice hero type of heading with the search. And it looks like we've got main features here, get a library card, unearned resources, digital library, attended program, etc. New materials. We've got this how can I help you little thing floating down here. I'm going to get rid of that for now. Just so it's not in my way. It looks like I have upcoming events and what's trending at the library. Next great read. It looks like we have a carousel with books. And then some contact information, library hours, social media icons, signing up for the newsletter, and then copyright information. Fantastic. So what I'm going to do is use a few tools to get a quick feel for this. So, and the links to these are in the slides that'll be handed out. So the first thing I'm going to look at, there's something called the accessibility bookmarklets. These accessibility bookmarklets can showcase various things. I mentioned these landmarks. I'm going to try that first, but we can look at headings, lists, etc., to easily see the information outline of our page. So what it does is it overlays. So we have a site banner. We have 2 navigation regions. That's fantastic. We have a region here, which is the chat widget. That's that how can I help you widget that I dismissed. We have a footer. What I don't see though is a main content region. So we're not telling people what the main content of this page is. Now it's possible that just that main page didn't have it. Let's take a look. I'll take a look at a subpage here in a minute. Sometimes it's skipped on home pages, but it really shouldn't be. This search and this banner here, all of these icons to get a library card, etc., all of those links, upcoming events, what's trending, that next great read, that probably should have all been in the main content region. Though depending how you think about it, next great read could have been complimentary. I think it's part of the main purpose of the homepage, so it should probably be in the main content region, but you have discretion there. Upcoming events, that is a main purpose of the homepage. What's trending, etc. So we'd probably want those. Let's look at how these are labeled. I'm going to hover over this. This says element nav, role equals navigation. There's no label there. There's no label here. So these two navigation regions, a person will know what they are, but they won't be able to as quickly jump to them or select them from a list of regions because they're not labeled. And so that would be something we want to correct. So that's how those look. Let's look at our heading structure. We have our landmarks. And here are our headings, and their heading structure is, I don't see in heading 1. So there's no heading that tells people where we are. This Niles Main District Library should have been the heading 1 for this page, because that's the name of where we're at, and it's the branding information for the site. Then we should have heading 2. Oh, here's our heading 1. It's what's trending at the library. Probably not actually what should be here, because that's not the name of this page. That is, the name of this page is the homepage of the Niles Main District Library. What's trending should have been a heading 2. Each of these links should probably be a heading 2, but honestly, they don't even need to be headings because they are links. They're not introducing new page content. And so those could have just simply been links. Upcoming events, that is correctly a heading 2. But that what's trending upcoming events are kind of at the same level in the document outline. So they should have had the same level of heading. These newsletter, cover art, etc., those could have been heading 3s. Again, though, they're links, so we might not need to make them headings. But I could see where someone would want them to be links, but they should have been a heading 3. We skipped from heading 1 to heading 4. So that's going to cause confusion. This here, we've got a heading 4 for a date, but I'm going to drag that out of the way, possibly not for a month. That's just the name is 24. So it's not telling us what month with that heading. So if I'm looking for an upcoming event by a heading, that's really not all that helpful to me. I just have an extra layer of headings to go through. And if something's spanning the month, I don't necessarily know. This makes sense as a heading here. Craft service, take and make, no, move that out of the way. Yeah, no sofa fleece blankets, virtual in-person rise. So we can see these should have been H3s. These probably shouldn't even be headings necessarily, unless we included the month as well. But the problem is if we do that, March 24th, those are the same text at a heading. So we have a problem. This is unique. So this should probably be a thing we'd want to restructure, but just so we know, if someone calls and says, hey, I'm trying to look at your upcoming events and I'm not quite making sense of it. Well, here's why, because the heading structure is a little weird. We tell them, yeah, look for this heading for the event name. The date is also a heading, but that might not be as helpful to you. Just look for the title of each event as a heading. Your next great read, that should be a heading 2. It's another section of the page. Otherwise, what we have is an outline here, heading 1, really low, heading 2, really low, heading 4. So this is going to look like it's part of the upcoming events, which it really isn't. It changes the pattern. It's something completely different. And contact the library hours, stay connected. Those are probably also heading 2s because they're not They're separate from each of the other things, and they're kind of at the same level. So that's our heading structure, and that's the next thing we'd look for. We could look for lists, but that is not as helpful right now. We know the navigations are lists. That's pretty common. Our upcoming events, we might want to be a list. That's a good list for those links. That's really common for links. This should be a list of items. These structures here in this carousel. So a person knows how many there are. I'll want to take a look at the source code for that to figure out how interactive it is. But so that's just an idea of the page structures. Images have images. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to kind of tab into this. I note that when I hover over the menu, this expands, and I have hours and location. Translate site doesn't expand automatically. So I want to know if that tells someone what they can do with that. All of these expand: borrow, calendar, research, and learn. And it looks like it's a bit of a mega menu. So let's dive into that, just see what happens. I'll just start tabbing into this. So all those tabs presses there, that's the consequence of how I chose to set up my browser. Okay, so I'm now in the web page itself, and I can't see at all what I'm interacting with. So what that means is that sighted users who cannot use a mouse will not be able to interact with this web page because they can't do it. I'm going to inject some code into here real quick. This is just something that I do just so we can see it. I usually do focus, and I'll just say outline red. Okay. So that's that. So now I should be able to see what's going on. It doesn't actually work. Okay. So in this case, what we have is the menu is not, I just can't see what I'm interacting with. Get a library card. Okay. Hours and location. It looks like hours library, hours and location. So hours and location, I can't open it via keyboard. I have to go to a separate web page. And that's okay. That's another pattern that's used. It means I have to do a little bit more, but that's all right. I can get the information. So room to optimize, but not completely preventing someone who is blind or only from using the site. Let's go up here, hours and location. My account, get a library card, translate the site. Looks like I can't translate the site. Oh, there we are. It's spacebar. Okay, so I could do that. That's great. Borrow. Okay. So what it looks like is that even though this menu isn't expanded, when I'm tabbing, I'm going into it. I shouldn't be able to do that if I can't see it. It should open when I get there, and I should only focus on things I can see. Otherwise, what I'm doing is if I'm on the phone to someone or getting help at the library and I'm asking for things, they'll say, yeah, you'll want to go and open the borrow menu and look for, under on the shelves, grab this. Well, I see it when I shouldn't be able to. And I could tell you, hey, I'm seeing this equipment link. What's that about? And if you're coming to help me, you don't know because you can't see it. So we don't have a synchrony there of interaction. So that's would be the keyboard support like that, tabbing through. So to show you I'm going to pick on the Champaign Public Library for a second. Give you an idea. We can see I've got this contact us, donate, my account, catalog, search. And then my focus disappears. When I get to this cafe, I'm in this menu now. So that's missing. So I can't really see what I'm interacting with. So that would be something that would need to be fixed. And as I'm tabbing through, so we can see we don't really have good visual focus indicator. Chicago Public Library, does a little bit better. Life after high school, staff list, teen staff picks, etc. Staff list. So that's good. I can tell what I'm interacting with. That's great. But, same thing with the Ramsey County Library for up here in Minnesota. So you can see what I'm interacting with as I tab through. But here's a note though. Let's go over and look at this in Firefox. And I mentioned in Firefox that you don't want to use, or I mentioned you don't want to use the default indicator, and that's that ring. Notice that little fuzzy line, the dotted line around there. It's not very prominent. It's hard to see. That's the default indicator that Firefox creates. So it's very hard to see. Someone who has limited vision might not be able to see that. I can see it great here, and I would see it fine in Edge. I would see it fine in Safari. But for Firefox, can't really see it very well. And remember, we can't tell them, hey, go use another browser. We need to support it up front. So that's checking for keyboard. That keyboard test can, ask yourself, can I see what I'm doing? Can I get to everything? Is it taking me dozens and dozens and dozens of key presses, say, to get through the menu, etc., or is it relatively efficient? And can I accomplish what I came to do? If you just do that check, that'll tell you a great amount of information about how accessible your web page is, just trying to do that with only a keyboard. It's the most impactful issue. If keyboard support is lacking, it really doesn't matter what other accessibility issues are there. Then all but static web pages access will be blocked. So another tool to run real quick, and I know I'm running us out of time, I'm sorry, would be Andy. Andy is created by the Social Security Administration, and it'll tell us all these things, focusable elements. And what we can do, we talked about logical reading order. It's top to bottom, left to right. I can click this tab order thing here, and it puts a nice little number up of how tab would move through this page. Whoops, sorry about that. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So how many tab stops, etc. It's not going down into the menus for us, which is good. We don't really want to know that necessarily, but we have an idea for how we're moving through. So to get all the way through here down to my content, to see my results here for what I can read, could take as much as 40 to 50 tabs. So that could be a barrier. Now let's see if we have skip links to make that easier. So I'll just click here somewhere. I have a skip to content link, skip to search. Okay, skip to main navigation. Nice. It's got a set of skip links. So I'll skip to content. So here I am in my content, and great, that got rid of 50 tab stops for me. So that's an essential feature. You want to be able to skip to main content like that. The difficulty here, though, is while they did have that skip to main content, notice how, oh, correction, they fixed this page. There's a main content here. So I know when I entered the main content. It skipped me all the way to here, though. So what if I wanted to find the filters first? It could be difficult because it skipped right past it. So maybe I can navigate by heading to the filters. Looks that way, though the heading structure is still a little messed up, but I could find my filters going to heading 3. I could see a list of my content. So could I navigate this page? Yeah. Is it going to be the best experience? Yeah, it's actually not too bad, but I think that there's room for improvement. So that's how so that would be using combination of bookmarks, the keyboard. Andy will tell me the tab order under focusable elements. It'll tell me if I have any color contrast issues. And it looks like there is a manual test and a contrast alert. So if we look at this website here, let's go and run Andy and look at our color contrast check. So we have 2 contrast alerts. Looks like that dark green on the lighter green content does not have sufficient color contrast. So that's important to know. And yeah, so that's an issue there. Everything else looks pretty good. though you can't necessarily tell when you're in front of a gray background or a colored background, like I think it was this one, or is it yeah, down here. This you can't really tell necessarily by that quick check. Or look at this curbside service for this social media icon. That's graphical. There's nothing that's going to tell me that. So there's a couple things I need to know. Do I have alt text for that? I'm going to go to back to Andy and look at my graphics. So it looks like it's telling me make sure that background image is decorative. I'm not going to go into that today. But alt text for images. So we have a misuse of alt text, but we're not missing any alt text. And there are decorative images and informational images. Informational images provide content to the page. These are decorative. The person there for curbside pickup, the book bundle for kids and teens, no more late fines. That's great, but if those images weren't there, it would not remove the ability to understand the page. And so those would be decorative images. Things that aren't decorative, Champaign Public Library, that is a logo. Logos are informational. If it was in a link and the only thing in that link, then that would not be decorative. So in this case, they had it as the only thing in that link. So note though that they misuse alt text, etc. So alt text for images, use Andy if you have text over a background message. There's color contrast. There's this, well, where's my show? The color contrast playground. This lets me go onto my page and I can go down and I can go and select something. I'll use my eyedropper. I'll get the gray text. And then I'll go back up here and select my background. Just that light gray. And it looks like it's all right. Needed a 3:1. It's got 4.6 to 1 for contrast. I'm good. Someone will be able to perceive that if color contrast is an issue for them. So that's running Andy. There are a lot of checks you can do. There's another tool called Inspector, and it's for Firefox. So I'll run it here on this page. Inspector gives me a list of things. It tells me about landmarks, tells me about what violations are there of web standards. That's WCAG. And then what are the manual checks I might need to do. So I'll double click on this. This tells me all content must be in a landmark. Okay, and we need a main landmark. That's telling me that that might be missing. So if I run my accessibility bookmarklets, yeah, there's no main landmark here. So this telling me I need one. There's no footer landmark here. There's only these navigations landmarks at the top. So more work could be done there. Pretty good on styles and content. Something going on with links. What's going on with our links? Link text must describe what the link does. So we have some links here that don't have any descriptive content. The person's not going to know where to go. If I take a look at these in the code, I've got this image, but the image has empty alt text. This is how you make an image decorative. So you describe alt, quote, quote, that image will not be presented to assistive technologies. But what we've done though, we made that decorative. This is a link. That's the only content of that link. So what's going to happen when a screen reader user comes here, it's got to tell them something. So it's going to try to read this URL. And URLs are not really human readable. It often rings as a string of just random letters and characters. And so they're not going to really know that this is about ebooks. This is about audiobooks, magazines, newspapers, journals, library. They're not going to know until they get to the ebooks link, the audiobooks link, etc. So we've introduced audible noise, wasting time, something useful, wasting time, something useful, wasting time, something useful. So that gives an idea of just what can happen if you're not thinking about that when you're creating your content. So I think that's covered most everything in a little bit of a rambling manner. I hope showing it to you helped. We're kind of at the end of our time, I believe. Are there any questions that I can answer very quickly? Or is there anything else you really want to know about? Okay, yeah. So just for takeaways.
We actually do
Yeah.
have one question down here in Champaign.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, my question is for the decorative images, is it helpful in terms of thinking about experience to describe the image? So if they're tabbing over it, they at least kind of, like I was taught to do, person holding an iPad for that first image. Is that helpful?
Oh, like this one here?
Or farther down, over
Oh,
overdrive
here,
and Libby? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. In this instance, is the person holding an iPad, is that image necessary for helping one understand what that link is for? If it's-
Probably not, but I just think about
Yeah.
sort of like the equally effective or like an equal
Yeah.
experience, like people using a screen reader, then they're getting the information, but they're not experiencing the site in the same way.
They're not. But that's why we don't talk about equal experience. It's equally effective access.
Okay.
And so that's an excellent question and a very good point, in that we often think when we're including things that are kind of the marketing and look and feel of the website, those don't necessarily translate to information that someone who is blind wants to have for parsing the web page. Because what would happen there is it would be their experience. They'd go through here. It would go person holding an iPad image, overdrive Libby / Libby e-books link, and then search and check out ebooks. That's what it'd be like as they read it. And actually it'd say person holding an iPad image link. So there's multiple ways we could optimize this. And actually, let me show it from here. Sorry for the quick scrolling. So I think I want here. Yes. So this is a common thing, trend these days with cards. So we have 3 tab stops for this given card. We've got the image, we have the title, and we have a read more link. For that, what we were just looking at, there's no read more, but we do have that image in the title. But be aware that's unnecessary tabbing. That image doesn't really provide more context to the card. If it does, then you need to, it's really a matter of opinion, and your description was good for that. Just person holding an iPad. How would you describe it to someone succinctly on a telephone for the context of the use of the image? But we could optimize it more like this. Now we've got 1 tab stop. We treat the image as decorative, and then article title is the name of that link. So now we have 2 tab stops. So we have to have a read more. Now, one thing about read mores is you need to have off-screen text that uniquely identifies what that read more link is for. Otherwise, you could have 10 or more read more links and it becomes ambiguous and a person can't choose a link quickly from the page. So, so that's the situation here. We could even get rid of the read more link. That's not necessary for the understanding of this card, or just have the read more link. So it's a matter of, for images, is it important for understanding? If not, it's probably decorative. Are you using it as the only content for a link? If so, it is informational, but the information cannot be the content of the image. Instead, it has to be what the link is going to do. So back to that. Does that answer your question?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Who do you recommend to work on our website? Should we ask our web creators to give a report and work with them on what needs fixing? That's a good idea. Yes. Have them, if those who are the vendor who created your website when you talk to vendors to create a website for you, make sure that the web content accessibility or the WCAG guidelines 2.0 are an acceptance criteria for the work that they do. If you're in the Champaign area and if you work with, say, Surface 51, I think it's called, they understand this. A couple of others are learning. There are a few others that you can ask them, hey, we need to make sure our website meets federal and state law, meets WCAG guidelines, level AA. Can you do that? Your content creators who are creating articles, like if I click in here, you should provide enough to, well, I thought that would go to a static text page, not somewhere else random. So that, I had no idea about that. I want to find a website that's not going to take me somewhere weird. Let's go hours and locations, say. All right. The person who creates this page of the website should be the one you talk to about fixing the headings if headings are wrong. Make sure alt text is there if alt text is missing, that kind of thing. If it's something for color contrast, where they used what was built into the web page, that's going to be your site administrator. And if they can't do it, then you'll need to talk to whoever created the website for you to fix it. So it's a little bit nuanced, but this is why it's important to know those basic checks, understand about color contrast, etc. So you can kind of check your stuff as you go. So I hope that helps. There are a lot of layers. Yeah, Andrea says, it's a lot of layers, but very helpful. It really is a lot of layers, but it's whoever can fix it, but make sure that you have someone in your library who's responsible for just checking the website on occasion. That would be what I would recommend. Because otherwise we get thinking of the job we're doing. We don't think about the fact we had to make it accessible. We may not even know what to do or that we had to do anything extra. And so we crank this thing out. It looks great, but it's not necessarily what we wanted. Any more questions? Well, thank you all for inviting me to come talk with you today. If you have any follow-up at any point, want to talk about something more specific, I'd be happy to come back and present again.